I woke up and found myself in pitch-black darkness. I thought this was rather unusual, as there is usually some light in a bedroom. Unless the curtains are made of heavy blackout material, some light generally filters through them or around the edges. But no, it was completely dark. That told me one thing for certain: I was not in my own bedroom at home. Also, I could hear a faint humming, which suggested a windowless room with air conditioning. The air temperature was comfortably warm, and I didn't have any covers over me. That was also strange. But what felt even stranger was that, when I shifted slightly and touched a different part of the surface I was lying on, it suddenly felt quite cold. Something like a rubber sheet came to mind. Maybe I had moved in my sleep and that's what woke me up. I lay there, trying to figure out where I was and what had happened. I couldn't recall anything leading up to this moment. Looking further back, there was no issue. I knew I was a 25-year-old accountant at a mid-sized firm. My name was Charles Bishop. I had no parents or siblings. I'd been on my own for a while. I could remember my childhood, my professional training, and my job. I could also recall choosing my annual holiday. The advertisement had promised a unique, surprise, mystery, adventure, action-packed holiday. I responded to the ad and got a brochure, though frankly, it didn't reveal much more. It mentioned the company name, Legree's Luxury Holidays, and invited me for an interview to discuss it further. The name Legree rang a faint bell. Maybe I'd read about it somewhere before without paying much attention. I decided to make an appointment and attend the interview. I showed up as arranged and found myself in front of a door marked Legree's Luxury Holidays. I entered and was shown into a small interview room where a woman, probably in her late 20s or early 30s, was seated behind a desk. She wore a business suit and radiated professionalism. She introduced herself as Miss Cox. I asked for more details and got a vague but intriguing reply. She mentioned words like abroad, mixed group, young singles, layered into the description, but left most things open, so I had to ask direct questions. It was an adventure holiday in the sense of being novel, not something extreme like mountain climbing or skydiving. It offered activities, but not high-risk ones. She clarified that I wouldn't need any kind of special or hazardous travel insurance. "Have you had many repeat bookings?" I asked next. Miss Cox smiled warmly and said, "No, because it obviously couldn't be unique, a surprise, a mystery, or novel, a second time around." It made perfect sense, a little glib, perhaps, but logical enough. She added 2 final notes. First, they had never received a single complaint of any kind. Second, she wasn't usually based in the office, she was one of the trip leaders, or instructors, as she called it. That meant she'd be present during the holiday, and available should any issues arise. Eventually, I signed up. The price wasn't as steep as I'd expected, and I figured, what have I got to lose? If only I'd known. On departure day, I returned to the same building with my luggage. I was led into a lounge-like room with armchairs and a few staff members, all wearing the LLH logo. They said I was the first to arrive and offered me something to drink while I waited. I chose coffee. Not long after finishing it, I lost consciousness and remembered nothing until waking up now. With no memory left to retrace, I could only wait and try to stay calm. Just as I began to drift off again, a bright ceiling light snapped on abruptly. I looked around. As I'd guessed, the room had no windows. The heavy-looking door featured a keyhole and a small hatch, currently closed. A wall-mounted hook held nothing. The bed was really a low platform with a mattress, and yes, it was covered in a light blue waterproof sheet. Cheerful color or not, it did little to ease my nerves. I sat up and placed my feet on the floor. There was a small wash basin in one corner, with some toiletries on a shelf and a compact shower cubicle nearby. Against another wall stood a simple wardrobe and a chest of drawers. A full-length mirror hung beside them. I was just about to check for my clothes when a calm female voice came through a hidden speaker. "Please get up, freshen up, and dress in the clothes provided in the wardrobe. You have 30 minutes to prepare before someone arrives to guide you." There wasn't much to do but follow instructions. I let go of the clothing concern for the moment. My next thought was to shave, but there wasn't any shaving gear in sight. I ran my hand over my face and was surprised to find it completely smooth, no stubble at all. Strange. But it explained the absence of a razor. I used the basic facilities, then stepped into the shower. There were no visible buttons, but once the door clicked shut, warm water began to spray from the overhead shower head. Moments later, additional side jets activated. Just as I wondered about soap, the water streams changed to a gentle foamy wash. I used my hands to clean up, letting the automated system do its work. Now the question was, how would I rinse? Once again, the shower automatically shifted back to warm water, rinsing me clean, but then came a shock. Without warning, the jets intensified and blasted freezing cold water from all directions. I gasped, startled by the chill, and instinctively looked for a way to shut it off. There was no visible control, and when I reached for the door, it wouldn't budge. I stood there, shivering and shielding myself as best I could, until the water jets stopped and warm air began blowing from above and around me, gently drying my skin. After a few moments, there was a soft click and the door finally opened. Still unsettled, I began looking for clothes. I checked the drawers, they were all empty. Then I opened the wardrobe. Inside, 2 hangers held a green and white striped outfit and a crisp white apron. The outfit reminded me of an old-fashioned summer uniform, neat, tidy, but completely unfamiliar. None of my original clothes were there. Frustrated, I shut the door and sat back on the bed to think, and winced from the chill of the mattress beneath me. The thought of meeting someone in that outfit made me pause, but meeting someone with nothing on? Definitely worse. Reluctantly, I opened the wardrobe again and put on the uniform. It fit perfectly, tailored, even. The fabric felt lightweight, and the style, with its Peter Pan collar and short cuffed sleeves, seemed oddly formal. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. The contrast between the outfit and my clearly male face left me feeling even more confused and awkward. I decided to ignore the apron for now and waited. Eventually, I heard footsteps approaching, steady, firm, and deliberate. There was something in the rhythm that projected confidence, maybe even authority. The steps stopped outside my door. A moment later, the observation panel slid open, and I saw a pair of eyes looking in. Then it snapped shut. The door opened, and a woman entered. She looked vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place her. She wore a crisp white blouse and a black skirt, professional and commanding. Her shoes gave her just enough extra height to stand slightly above me. Around her waist was a black belt with what looked like communication tools clipped to it. One empty hook kept drawing her hand, like she expected something to be there, perhaps out of habit. She gave me a long, assessing look and then asked plainly, "Why aren't you wearing the apron?" Instead of answering, I spoke up quickly. "Where am I? What is going on? Where are my things?" My voice was firm. "I want to speak with someone in charge." She replied coolly, all in good time. "First, you'll have breakfast, and then you'll meet the principal, Miss Jacobs. She'll explain everything. But none of that will happen until you're properly dressed, including the apron." I ignored her use of the words "your apron," as if it was something I had agreed to. Not a chance. "First, I want my own clothes. Then I'll talk to your principal, and then we can discuss breakfast." She narrowed her eyes. "I'm a supervisor here, and things happen in my order. First, your apron. Then breakfast. Then the principal." She opened the wardrobe again, pointed at the apron, and said sharply, "Put on your apron." "No." "Not happening," I replied flatly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she smiled, not warmly, and pressed a small device on her belt. Moments later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A second supervisor entered, taller, broader, and even more imposing. She wore a similar uniform but had a leather strap looped through her belt and a folded clipboard in hand. "Trouble?" she asked. "Yes, Miss Dowdy." He refused to follow protocol and has been rather impolite. The taller woman glanced at me. "Oh. Well, let me make things easier. Around here, cooperation is non-negotiable. That's the rule, whether you like the dress code or not. Miss Cox raised an eyebrow, waiting. We can do this the easy way, Miss Dowdy continued. Or we can delay everything until you've shown a bit more respect for the system. I didn't respond. I knew my silence was being interpreted as resistance. Miss Cox stepped forward and said, "You've made your position clear." But so have we. Without the proper attire, you won't be eating, and you won't be meeting Miss Jacobs. Your schedule, and your comfort, is now in your hands. She gave me one last look and added, "If you'd like to avoid further complications, I suggest you reconsider." She turned and left the room, Miss Dowdy following behind her. The door closed with a solid click, and I was left staring at the wardrobe and the apron inside. Miss Cox returned, her expression cool and unreadable. "You've made things harder than they needed to be," she said. "And now, we need to address your refusal to follow basic instructions." There was no shouting. No dramatics. Just the kind of cold control that made the room feel even smaller. Miss Dowdy stood beside her, arms folded, watching me like a hawk. I could feel my nerves unraveling. "Defiance has consequences," Miss Cox continued. "But we're not here to punish, we're here to help you adapt." Her tone made the word help sound anything but helpful. I stood there, still trembling from the tension, trying to figure a way out. But all exits were blocked, physically and psychologically. Miss Dowdy finally stepped forward. "You've seen what resistance gets you: isolation, delays, and setbacks. You want answers? You want your freedom?" I nodded slowly. "Then play your part." There was silence. The wardrobe stood open. The apron still hung there like a silent test. Miss Cox gave a slight nod. "Well." "Yes, miss," I replied quietly. "Louder," she said, voice still calm. "Yes, miss," I repeated, clearer now, just wanting this part to be over. "Good," she said with a satisfied smile. "Now ask for it." I swallowed. "May I wear the apron, please, miss?" Only then did they both step aside and allow me to move forward, back toward the wardrobe, and toward whatever came next. I finally said the words they wanted to hear. "Please, may I wear my apron, miss?" Miss Cox frowned. "That's not quite right. Say it properly." I hesitated, then corrected myself. "Please may I wear my apron, miss?" Miss Dowdy chimed in. "He doesn't sound like he means it. I think he should really want to wear it." Miss Cox gave a dry chuckle. "Oh, I like that idea." The atmosphere thickened. I could feel their eyes on me, analyzing every word, every hesitation. "Go on," she said. "Ask again." I did, once, twice, several times. The room felt smaller with each repetition. Every sentence I spoke felt like a step further away from myself. After what felt like forever, Miss Cox finally nodded. "Now you seem convinced. After all, you did refuse earlier." "Yes, miss," I said. "I'm sure now." They approached. Miss Cox took the apron from the wardrobe and began fastening it around me, without unbinding my hands. It slid into place too easily, too perfectly. Miss Dowdy leaned in, voice low. "Now you're starting to understand how things work here." By then, I didn't know what was worse, the silence, the strange obedience, or the realization that this was only the beginning. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The nightmare wasn't over, not yet. In Miss Cox's words, I was now officially aproned, and I hated how it felt. The strange uniform made me feel out of place, like I was wearing someone else's identity. It wasn't about the fabric, it was about control. Miss Cox checked her watch. "I think we're finally ready for your delayed breakfast." Miss Dowdy removed the item from her belt, a thin black baton used for silent commands, and hung it on the hook behind the door. "In case protocol needs reinforcing," she said with a smirk. She stepped into the hallway and called, "You can go in now." A girl about my age entered, dressed similarly but in a blue and white variation of my uniform. She quietly murmured, "Thank you, miss," and pushed in a small service trolley. She gave a polite nod to Miss Cox and stood still, waiting. I was motioned to sit. Still bound at the wrists, I dropped onto the edge of the bed a bit too abruptly, forgetting how sore I still felt from earlier. The shock made me flinch. "Sit still and stop overreacting," Miss Cox snapped. "You've had worse." I did my best to hold still, biting back the discomfort. "Go ahead, Susie. You know the routine." Susie stepped forward and removed a plastic bib from the trolley. I hesitated, leaning slightly away. A sharp glare from Miss Cox froze me. "Do you really want to cause another delay?" she asked flatly. I let Susie tie the bib around my neck. She picked up a bowl and spoon. The contents looked like a bland mixture, probably porridge or semolina. Nothing harmful, but not remotely appetizing either. It was cold, thick, and clung to the spoon. But I didn't protest. I simply opened my mouth and forced it down, bite by bite. When the bowl was finally empty, Susie gently wiped the last bits from my chin. Miss Cox dismissed her. "Put the trolley in the corridor and return." Susie complied, gave another respectful nod, and resumed her place, standing by the wall with her hands folded neatly. Miss Dowdy stepped forward and untied my wrists. I instinctively rubbed them, but she quickly redirected me. "You'll need to learn proper protocol now. Start by practicing how to address your superiors." What followed was a lesson in posture, movement, and deference. I was shown how to stand, how to fold my hands over the apron, and how to lower myself into a formal curtsy. "This is how you'll greet the principal. It's non-negotiable," Miss Cox said. Then she turned to leave. "I'm going to see if the principal is ready for your introduction. While I'm gone, no talking. Stand here. Hands folded. Look at your reflection." She left with Miss Dowdy. The door closed behind them. I was alone. I stood facing the mirror, trying to reconcile the reflection with who I believed myself to be. My face, above a uniform I hadn't chosen, looked back at me. Silent. Stiff. Powerless. And yet, something had shifted. Not just the clothes, but the rules of the world around me. As I studied the apron I now wore, I couldn't help noticing how deliberate its design felt, structured, polished, and strangely symbolic. Men in history had worn aprons for practical purposes: shopkeepers, carpenters, doctors. But this was different. The wide shoulder straps, the carefully shaped bib, and the cinched waist gave it a very specific look. It was less about utility, and more about presentation. This style was often seen on historical domestic workers or traditional nurses, roles tied closely to routine, service, and quiet obedience. Something about the apron's crispness, its institutional neatness, seemed to suggest not just responsibility, but control. I thought briefly about how uniforms have always been used to signal status, or lack thereof. Even in older institutions, like orphanages or boarding schools, clothing choices weren't random. They sent messages. And this one felt like it was sending plenty. So what was this place? The formal tone, the behavior of the supervisors, the cell-like room, they all pointed toward something disciplinary. And yet, Miss Cox had referred to her superior not as a warden or a governor, but as the principal. That didn't sound like a prison. It sounded more like a school. My mind returned to the earlier image of the striped dress. There had been something childlike about it, something almost school uniform inspired, but not quite. If this was a school, it wasn't like any I'd ever known. My thoughts wandered back to the object hanging by the door, a thin rattan cane. It looked almost delicate, yet I knew better. Its presence was enough to stir up a sharp memory. I silently promised myself, no more testing limits. No more defiance. I didn't want to feel powerless again. I turned slightly, and for a moment my gaze met Susie's. she stiffened just enough for me to notice, then gave the slightest shake of her head. I looked away, understanding her caution. When I glanced back, her expression had softened, but her posture remained rigid, hands folded, eyes ahead, standing as if waiting for the next signal. And in that moment, I realized she had been here longer. And she had learned how to survive. A chilling thought crept in. Was Susie aware we were being monitored? Had everything, even my earlier humiliation, been recorded? That idea alone was enough to unsettle me. If true, if they had footage of that moment, it could easily be twisted, edited, replayed for effect. And perhaps, it already had been. I turned back toward Susie, half expecting a warning look, but she stayed still. Emotionless. Eyes ahead. If she knew, she wasn't showing it now. Her uniform, while similar to mine, seemed more complete. She wore a crisp cap, thick black stockings, and sturdy flat shoes, all of which gave her an almost institutional appearance. It occurred to me that, while I had only been in this place for a day, Susie may have been here far longer. Before I could reflect further, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Miss Cox entered. Her expression was unreadable, but this time there was something new. A slim leather riding crop now filled the previously empty hook on her belt. She also carried a small black case. Susie dipped into a respectful curtsy. I hesitated, then followed. Miss Cox walked past me without a word. Her gaze landed on Susie. "You broke protocol," she said quietly. Susie didn't speak. She didn't flinch. Miss Cox stood silently for a moment, then leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, Susie only nodded once, and resumed her waiting posture. Miss Cox turned to me. "The principal is ready. It's time." The atmosphere in the room had changed. The air felt heavy, like everything I had seen was a lesson. A warning. And I hadn't even met the real authority yet. "I should note your hesitation when I entered," Miss Cox said coldly, "but the principal is expecting you now." She gave a slight pause before adding, "Your induction isn't complete yet, so you're not required to curtsy, but doing so will leave a good impression. I'll leave the choice to you." She reached into a drawer and produced a pressed white cap, identical to the one Susie wore. Without asking, she pinned it neatly into place on my head. Somehow, that small addition made the uniform feel complete. When I caught sight of my reflection in a passing mirror, I froze. My face reddened instinctively. Miss Cox smirked. "That look never changes. We call it shameclad, the moment someone realizes their old identity no longer fits." Then came the command, casual but unmistakable, "Come along, Charlie." We walked in silence down the corridor. For the first time, I noticed something. I wasn't bound. I could have turned and run. But where? Dressed like this, with no idea where I was or what waited beyond the walls. Miss Cox glanced sideways, reading my thoughts before I could speak. "Don't worry," she said. "They all think about it." The corridor opened up into a wide hallway. Through high windows, I caught a glimpse of a square courtyard outside, a vast paved area divided into geometric sections. Their purpose was unclear, and Miss Cox didn't offer any explanation. We reached a polished wooden door marked Principal. Miss Cox stopped and gave me one last instruction. "Straighten your apron. Appearances matter here." Without hesitation, I did as I was told. I was already starting to follow orders without question, even when they sounded like suggestions. "One more thing," she added. "Today, you're allowed to ask questions. After today, you speak when spoken to. So if you have anything on your mind, say it now." She knocked. A crisp voice from within, "Come in." We stepped inside. I dipped into a formal greeting, something like a curtsy, just in case it mattered. As I began to rise, Miss Cox placed a firm hand on my head, holding me in position for a moment longer. Then, a pause, followed by a sharp rise. I stood slowly. The woman behind the desk was dressed in gray, precise, severe, composed. Everything about her radiated authority. Her posture. Her silence. Her eyes. Her office was almost ordinary, except for one detail. Mounted behind her desk was a long staff-like rod resting in 2 brackets. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't referenced either. Its presence alone spoke volumes. This was Miss Jacobs. And she didn't need to raise her voice to make you feel very, very small. The principal stared at me in silence, her eyes hard and unblinking. It made me keenly aware of my appearance, the uniform, the apron, the cap. My face flushed again. Then she picked up a document and read aloud. Charles Bishop. You have been detained under Article 17 of our Civic Regulation Act. You are to undergo a 5-year reorientation assignment as part of your civic restitution. I blinked. What? That can't be right. I don't understand. She cut me off. You were found within our borders without authorization. No record of entry. No clearance papers. In our system, that constitutes automatic reallocation. I don't even remember being tried. I protested. She glanced at the file. There was no trial. The data speaks for itself. The process is administrative, not judicial. I stood in stunned silence. An appeal, she continued, would likely be dismissed as frivolous. If that occurs, your assignment time is doubled. Shall we proceed? I said nothing. She nodded once and continued. This facility exists to prepare individuals for assigned roles, ones that support our social infrastructure. You have been assigned to domestic services. Hence, your current attire. I looked down. You will undergo a 3-month training period here. Compliance is mandatory. If your conduct falls short of expectations, you may be reassigned to corrective labor protocols. The words were cold. Methodical. Designed to strip away resistance. Any infraction may delay your training timeline. Your official service term does not begin until training is complete. Be advised, regression triggers sentence extension. I nodded stiffly. Sign here to acknowledge. I signed my name, Charles Bishop, unaware it would be the last time I would use it. She continued. For operational clarity, you are being issued an assignment alias. From this point on, you will be referred to as Unit 47, designation, Shirley. The name felt like a blow. The client who receives your placement may continue this alias or assign a different one at their discretion. Their authority includes behavioral reporting and evaluation rights. She tapped her desk twice, then asked, Miss Cox, your report? Miss Cox stepped forward, clinical as ever. Initial resistance was addressed. Refused uniform compliance. Repeated verbal dissent. Was eventually compliant after reorientation engagement. Noted, said the principal. Then she turned back to me. You'll be escorted to orientation sector 2. Your performance will be monitored. The door behind me clicked. And just like that, the identity I knew was over. The principal's gaze was cold and measured. That cane on the wall, consider it symbolic, she said. Each assigned individual here is issued a disciplinary protocol. Yours is strict. She let that hang in the air before continuing. Your instructors may choose different methods to enforce compliance. Some prefer verbal correction. Others prefer psychological tools, isolation, silence, privilege removal. The key is consistency. Missteps are never ignored. I nodded slowly, absorbing it all. You're not alone in this facility, she added. There are others here, assigned to different categories of service. Uniforms vary depending on role, progression level, and behavioral record. She gestured toward a diagram on the wall, a coded chart with color blocks. Green denotes domestic trainees. Blue and white indicate advanced staff. Brown is a corrective assignment. Pink, reevaluation. Her eyes flicked to mine. You're in green, for now. I hesitated, then asked, "Don't I have any rights?" "A way to appeal, maybe through a diplomatic channel?" Both women exchanged knowing glances. Miss Jacobs answered, "There is an ambassador from your country posted here. However, she's become what we call acculturated." She smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "She admires our system. Supports it. Live by it. Her household follows a particularly strict interpretation of our civic code, one of the strictest I've seen." I stared at her. She doesn't take kindly to noncompliance, especially from citizens who embarrass her country. I doubt she'd lift a finger on your behalf. In fact, she added, she might request your reassignment. She always needs more hands. A chill ran through me. "That's not a threat, surely," she said, using the name again. "It's a reality check." That appeared to be the end of the briefing. Miss Cox gave a slight nod, and I offered a nervous, shallow bow, unsure what else to do. "Return him to his quarters," the principal ordered. "And prepare him for the orientation cycle." Without a word, Miss Cox turned and led me back down the corridor, to the place I already dreaded returning to.